Hey, Restorers, welcome to the season finale of the first season of Chasing the Vision. You're probably listening to the December episode of 2024, and we are here to talk about human capital is the terminology I'm going to use, but I think we're going to have some back and forth discussions on different terminology here. You might like that term, you might not like that term, and I think JT and Tim have some differing opinions. So really quick, thank you so much to everybody who's been listening. We are well over 1,000 listens and views at this point. So thank you for tuning in. If you've missed other episodes, you can check them out on CNR's, all of CNR's podcast platforms. We're everywhere. YouTube, our website, wherever you may be. So if you missed other episodes, please go back. We've talked about everything from financial cleanliness to dealing with conflicts in family business to the roles of owners and leaders and managers in companies and a whole bunch of other things, customer-based sales, you name it, we've talked about it. So we are here to talk about the idea of human capital. So Tim, I'm going to toss it over to you to kick it off. And what are your thoughts of the term employee, human capital, team? What do we say?
Well, let's talk about season finale first. It sounds so terminal.
Season finale, not series finale. There's a difference.
Big
Series
deal.
finale means it's done.
I
Season
can't believe
finale
I
means,
can't believe we've done 12 of these already.
Honest to goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think there'll be a season two.
I
So
think so as well. So this is the season one finale, not the series finale. Yes. Good clarification.
well, I mean, not to ruffle anybody's feathers on the last episode of the season, but I never liked the term human capital. It sounds like we're putting the employees in the same category on the balance sheet as the trucks and the tools and the equipment and all the rest of that stuff. And I mean, some might say that, you can depreciate an employee, but I don't see them in that same category. They're not tools, they're not trucks, they're not equipment. I personally like to think of employees as leverage in a company. So I would look at it more as something like invested capital, where you have to reach a return. There's got to be a return on that investment. So when you bring an employee on, yeah, can you view them as a liability? Absolutely. There's risk involved there, but you can also use them as leverage to create more profit at the bottom line. And I think that's really the intent of the discussion is, how can we use employees to get a greater return at the bottom line of the business? Because we can't do it all ourselves. Otherwise, everybody be sitting there with a computer, and maybe that's the gig economy. I don't know. But at the end of the day, when you're in a service business, you need people to perform that service. Regardless of how good technology gets, those robots are not going to be doing a lot of the work that we charge our clients for in the field. So I prefer the term leverage or levers in a business, Michelle, not necessarily human capital.
Okay. JT, what about you?
Tim, I'll take that under advisement. Appreciate your perspective on that. We've all heard horror stories about, good cultures, bad cultures, good employees, bad employees. And over the last 4, 5, 6 years, especially through COVID, we all heard that owners couldn't find good help. Nobody wanted to work, easier to do it myself, whatever owners say. And it was difficult at times, which is why there's such a focus now on retention. And I noticed that some owners just talk about their staff or their leverage, their human capital, as something to be tolerated. And sometimes they even speak with scorn. They've just sort of had it with employees. And I think that's more on the owner than it is with staff. I think all in all, teams of employees are very, very good. But it's tough for employees when they feel that from the owner. It can be challenging to deliver your best self and show up and do your best work every day. And so I think owners, if they view people as not just a labor force, as a pool of talent just to get things done, but the collective experience of their skills and education and personalities and their creativity and ability to solve problems, that's a big one. Their character, they've got to move from an asset to be managed to something to be invested in and to grow. There, Tim, there's your term, invest. And it's true that has to happen. And it's if they can shift their focus into this investment into their talent, I think everybody's lives gets a little better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think a lot of business owners are they had bad experiences, with employees,
Mhm.
and you can tell who they are. They're the ones that you described before, JT, where they're talking about how their employees are a liability. They represent risk.
Mhm.
Mhm.
They're nothing but a pain in my butt, blah, blah, but they're necessary, right? And to view employees as something that needs to be tolerated, I think is entirely
Mhm.
the wrong approach to things. And I love sharing this story. So I heard this one a bunch of years ago. I was working with another contract consultant on a project management development program we were working with. And he was talking about how he was going into this company and analyzing the strategic reserve time of the employees that were working on the projects that this company did. Now, these were project-based companies, so they were, I think at this time they were building hydroelectric plants. So you can talk about teams and teams of individuals. And management was complaining because they didn't have time, so to speak, to work on these other things. So they were piling on these employees as though they're a piece of machine that they were just turning up the dial and expecting the same results. So this manufacturing organization had taken this individual I was talking to out into the warehouse, and he was proudly showing him this multi-million-dollar piece of equipment that they bought from their manufacturing line, and he was boasting of how many widgets it would produce or pump out at the line at the end of the day. And the consultant's comment was, well, what if you cranked it up to 240 or 250? And the guy just looked at him like, well, why would we want to do that? Well, you'd be able to produce more widgets. He said, yeah, but I'd break the asset. And his point was made at that point. He said, well, you're doing the same thing with your project managers.
Mhm.
You're asking them to
Mhm.
do X, Y, Z more than what their capacity is. Why would you treat your employees any differently than the asset?
Mhm.
But they are different. And I think that's the big thing to understand. So back to your comment about character, JT, and bad experiences with business owners and managers. I think it starts with character. If employees aren't showing up with their best self, if they're not putting forth
Mhm.
their best effort, those are all character traits. You
Mhm.
can't train to those things. I mean, those are things that are learned at a very early age, and a lot of it has to do with their pride of their work. If they're not coming to you with those character traits already, that relationship is probably doomed for failure. At least the expectations are doomed for being misaligned.
Mhm.
So it starts with finding the right character of employees and then building from there.
Mhm.
Get the right character, you can do great things with those employees.
Tim, I like that analogy a lot of you'll break the asset. And you were talking about they were meaning a machine, but it's right. It's true. You will break your people. So I'm going to jump around a little bit in our questions because that was the perfect segue. So we're talking about how employees are like the most important asset to a company. So JT, I'll kick this one to you first. When you're valuing a company, whether or not they want to sell, how
Mhm.
key are the employees and the team to a company's value?
There, how it directly correlates is confidence. And where it initially shows up is how many hats is an owner wearing, the proverbial hats or responsibilities. And some of those hats are not taken off by choice, right? I've worked with people who, they're wearing 15 hats and they wouldn't have it any other way. They take pride in saying they work 80 hours a week and they haven't, had a vacation in 10 years, although they could. They've got plenty of money, plenty of talent. Some people don't know how to let go, right? And so, and that's true. It's
Yep.
it's very sad, but true. And you've heard me in previous podcasts give some examples, and I won't reiterate those here. But some of those hats are by choice. Now, a couple of the key metrics I look at are uh, industry experience. Let's say there's a company that's got 5 key employees, and those key employees have 20 years each on average of industry experience. And let's say 10 of those years are with this target company, ABC Restoration. So we've got, 50 years of industry experience at this business. And now, how many of those, we've got industry experience and we've got experience with this particular industry, or I'm sorry, this particular business. And how close are those two aligned? Okay, we can have we can have a lot of industry experience and a lot of business experience, or we can have a lot of industry experience and very little experience with this particular business. Case in point, let's say we have really great quality employees that are, let's say they average 20 years industry experience, but the average tenure with this business is 18 months, 24 months. Okay, that's going to beg a lot of questions about the culture, the management philosophy, compensation packages. When an owner is running key employees through the front door slightly faster than they're running them out the back, it begs a lot of questions, and buyers will pick up on that right away. And so there's a confidence level there when you're planning as an owner. If there's a buyer looking from the outside in, you want to look at those couple of key figures.
Tim, you have anything you want to add to that? How do you value a company's most important asset?
Well, yeah, I think you can. I mean, to me, the definition of value, in my opinion, has always been the worth that people place on something that they're willing to pay for.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that willingness to pay for that is the key and operative thing there. And you have to be willing to make that investment accordingly. So if we're looking at the employees as leverage, you're making an initial investment or commitment to that capital. Having an expected rate of return has to be measured. And as you alluded to, JT, there's a ton of intangibles that are involved there. And you can look at them in combination or in whole. But at the end of the day, revenue per employee is the metric that a business owner must look at. Because that tells anybody, including yourself, how well you're utilizing that invested capital to realize a return, right? And whether you look at the top line or you look at the bottom line, it doesn't matter, but it's still a number per the number of bodies that you've got. What are you producing with the people that you have? Now, beyond that, I mean, there's a ton of that's a lagging indicator. There's a ton of leading indicators that go into that. I mean, we can look at cost performance indexes. You can look at production counts and defect callback ratios. And there's a ton of things that lead up to whatever that end result is. But at the end of the day, that revenue per employee, that is the number to look at, in my opinion.
Okay, all right. So I feel like we have to go to the beginning, the root of your team, right? Which is hiring, recruiting, retention. That's the root of this discussion. If you're not hiring and recruiting all the time, you're not going to get good employees into your company. And then if you don't have good things in place, you're not going to retain the talent you have, right? So this is a monster topic. I apologize to even try to ask it in one question, but I'm gonna try. Let's start with how have you two seen kind of the hiring, recruiting, retention, employee landscape overall change in the last few years? I think from my seat, the pandemic caused a major shortage. I think things are loosening up a little bit now, but there's still a shortage in the skilled trades. It does look like people are coming back. There's been a lot of shifts happening in the market. So JT, maybe I'll toss this one to you first. What do you see has been happening as far as labor goes and retention in the last 5 or so years?
Well, from a global perspective, as the interest rates went up, construction in general has slowed, and some of that talent has come back to the disaster restoration field instead of these prevailing wage jobs out, construction only. So that's really helped our cause in the restoration space. But overall, I think the industry of disaster restoration is heading the right direction, and building teams, accountability around those teams, trust, the ability to delegate. Years ago, people would say, I can't find good help. And I'd say, well, how are you delegating? And they'd say, well, I told them how to do it. I told them once, and that's not delegation. And so it's sort of an old school mentality on how to get things done. But I think technology has helped. I think software has helped. There's really timely and applicable KPIs. Much more transparency now than there used to be. I mean, you can go into most any software now and pull P&Ls by job and look at profit margins and labor rates, and it's really interesting to do that. So I think the the tangible portions of tracking jobs and learning effectiveness, I think that's all really good when it comes to employees. I don't know that software helps a lot when it comes to the intangible portions, but I think what it does is give the employees some instant feedback. It's not quarterly or semi-annually on how I did, how are my margins over the last, 25, 30, 40 projects. You can essentially get instant feedback now on their performance. And it takes from my seat, it takes some of the subjective nature out of these performance interviews. We can go right to the KPIs and show them how they're doing. And I think that's a good thing for both parties.
Tim, you have anything you want to add to I'm sure that you do, hiring and retention? I know that your clients, I've hired for some of your clients back in my recruiting days. It's a fun adventure. So hiring, recruiting, retention, what are your thoughts?
Right. I mean, this is a huge topic, and it was a big topic for us, Michelle. I think even before the pandemic
Yep.
days, you go back probably to 16, 17, 2016, 2017. We were doing at that time, we were doing a lot of research on the demographic changes that were coming out because the business that we're in is direct labor driven. We're in the trades and our clients are in the trades. And what we were seeing were trends that were scary. I mean, real scary. And we saw all of that just get expedited with the events of the COVID pandemic, where most of the folks that are skilled labor force, I mean, they're all retire age, or most of them were in that kind of retirement bucket. So the boomers were all on their way out, and the Gen Xers were all going to college, or the millennials were all going to college at that time. And then the Gen Zs behind them, Lord knows what was going to happen to to that generation. So it was all getting pushed away from the trades. That's all we knew at that time, right? And so our focus was we need to create a system or a tool for our clients to be able to give them a competitive advantage in the marketplace. So they could look at the available labor pool that was out there and capitalize on the ones that were worthy and the ones that they needed to be able to continue their business, growing their business. So for us, we had two big initiatives. It started off with what we eventually called Culture Forge, which was a system that was 4 parts that essentially took the 13 areas of any small business that have an influence on that company's ability to attract and retain top talent. The system itself then steps them through a primary level and a secondary level assessment that identifies areas that they can work on to really shore up those areas in their business, and then couples it with recommendations for that. But we then expanded that when we wrote the book, Forging Dynasty Businesses. That was kind of like the impetus for all of that. So the book and the system kind of go hand in hand. But we've seen significant changes just since even shortly before the pandemic area. There was a study that was done by the National Student Clearinghouse that said since 2018, enrollment in trade schools has actually gone up by 16%. So, everybody was aware of when Mike Rowe got on, his horse about promotion of the trades. And I think what we're seeing today is that with advances in technology, with the removing the stigma associated with working with your hands, so to speak, these days, people are realizing, hey, you can make a good living. There is a career path there in the trades, and it can be an honorable profession, especially in what restorers do. I mean, it's all about helping people, really, at the end of the day. So I think we're seeing major shifts, and business owners are taking a little bit different mentality with regard to employees and employment. They're realizing that employees have a choice. Employment is a choice. I made a comment to one of my colleagues, one of our consultants the other day. I said, hey, thanks for coming in and participating. And he looked at me and said, well, don't I didn't have a choice, did I? So employment's always a choice. and I didn't mean that wasn't meant as a threat, but it's meant as a humble approach to an employer-employee relationship, right? Yeah. You're here by choice. You could be doing other things, man. This is a vocation, and I'm glad you're here doing it. And the trades are no different.
The trades
Well,
are no
Tim,
different.
you bring up a really good point. And Michelle, I'd love to ask you a question if I could. What's important to a 55-year-old project manager or GM or estimator is going to be totally different than what's important to a 26-year-old.
Mhm.
That we've got totally different mindsets. And how have the two of you navigated that? I mean, you both hire people for staffing positions and help clients, etc. Michelle, what have you found to be the big differences in the age gaps and hiring now versus back in the day?
I do a lot of asking questions to figure out what people are looking for in a role to make sure that it's a fit both ways. Like if I can't deliver to you, or I know, like, even when I was recruiting, if I knew that that company wasn't going to be able to deliver something that maybe somebody was looking for, like,
Mhm.
I need to go pick my child up at 1 p.m. every day. I need to be done. And I know that this is an emergency response job and I can never be on call and all of these things. If you figure that out pretty early and it's not going to be a good fit, um, I feel like that was a little astray from your question, but I
Mhm.
think a lot of it is asking questions. I think everybody wants something different. So there's a lot of studies saying, I know that younger generations want to have a purpose. They want to know that they're bringing value. They want to find meaning in their work.
Mhm.
And that is part of it. But now we're also dealing with the flexibility, people wanting like to be remote, which doesn't work in restoration, or people wanting to flexibility, I think, is probably the biggest thing right now. Tim, do you
Mhm.
see that as well? I feel like we're in a really interesting time where people got used to the flexibility during the pandemic, whether they're in restoration or not. And now a lot of businesses are trying to edge back more toward that normal 8 to 5 in the office work week. Are you seeing that kind of the same?
Yeah, absolutely, Michelle. And I think it's so you've got this societal view on what work should be or what it should look
Hmm.
like, and then everybody wants to make it a generation conversation. I don't
Yes.
think it's generational in nature at all.
No.
I think what the pandemic and the changes in the workforce environment did was it brought to light the possibilities
Hmm.
that are out there for the employer-employee relationship and how they view getting work done.
Yep.
JT, you mentioned before all of the different metrics and the technology and the ways that we have of measuring performance today. I mean, we're a statistical society. I mean, just turn on a football game or a baseball game, that's all you see are statistics. And they're
Mhm.
real time. Like they're measuring performance as it happens right now.
Mhm.
We can do the same thing in business, but I think what the workforce is saying to us is it's not all about the metrics. It's
Mhm.
about me being able to go and pick up my kid at 1 o'clock when I need to, and you not
Mhm.
punching the clock on me, or it's about being able to take a day off when I'm not feeling my best. What you don't see behind the scenes are the employees that are logging in at 10 o'clock at night to check their emails,
Yeah.
or doing
Mhm.
work on the weekends. The job is still getting done.
Yeah.
And whether you measure it or not, for an employee, it's about feeling good about what they did during that day, regardless of what day of the week it is. Everybody, I think, understands that they've got a job to do. Whether they do it to the best of their ability or not, it's a different story. Um, working doesn't have to be a means to an end.
No.
It can be the thing that you do. And I mean, we could get into a rabbit hole about work-life balance, and uh, maybe that's another episode. Michelle, season two, right? Season
Season
two.
two. Season two. We're taking ideas now for season two. So if you have
Mhm.
ideas, email one of us.
Well, it reminds me of a quote that I heard a couple weeks ago, Tim, to your point that leading used to be done with your head, and moving forward now it's really got to be done with your heart to be able to connect with these employees and find out what's important. And I just found that interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so that was a perfect kind of segue to talk about career paths. And I think I know you both have some concrete things to say about career paths, but I would also love to weave some stories into this one because the industry is full of stories of I started as a technician and now I own this restoration company, or I'm in line to own it, or I'm the GM, or our industry is full of those stories of how that people went into a company that had clear career paths and made it really far. Because I think there are also a lot of horror stories, before I toss it over, of people that are hired into companies and promised a career path that doesn't exist. And they end up getting
Mhm.
caught in a role and never get promoted, maybe because they're a fabulous technician and the owner can't imagine them anywhere else, even though they really want to move up and have a leadership role or whatever that may be. So, JT, maybe I'll toss this one over to you first to kind of talk about the importance of career paths when it comes to companies and how that plays into retaining your best talent.
Well, with this attraction towards the trades right now, I think it's key, and I've seen it go both ways. It can be a complete crap fest out there, or it can be really successful. And we'll tell a success story this time. Last time, I think it was a horror story. I think it starts with recruitment. It starts with hiring the right mindset. And Tim, you'll probably back me up on this. You've got to hire for that character and drive and motivation. You can train plenty of skills along the way.
Yep.
But the company I'm thinking of is in the Bay Area, and they had a very clear career path on their wall, and they still do, for hiring these techs at $18, $20 an hour. And it's a very defined path on how you make $140,000, $150,000 a year as a project manager. And if you hit these certain metrics and you accomplish these things, you're going to get there. And I think they're up to 6 or 7 people now who have been hired as techs, and no formal education, and this is what they're turning into. And it's really a success story, but it can't just be lip service. And it's not just a poster on the wall. You've got to live and breathe this culturally and stand behind what you're hiring for and the path that you've laid out for them, because you're going to get buy-in if it's done right.
Tim, your thoughts?
Well, the industry, I think, is full of great stories, as are most, right? But when you ask people how they got into restoration, a lot of times it's by accident.
Yeah.
I mean, I came from the trades. I went to college, but I grew up for a love of construction and architecture and all the rest of that stuff. But I found a home here, and I think a lot of people have that similar story. I mean, we've had plenty of clients over the years that started off as the carpet cleaning technician, and maybe went out on their own. I mean, I tell you stories about a guy that was an immigrant and came and worked for an individual, and then started his own company, and the individual he originally worked for ended up working as an employee for him. So there's a lot of great stories in the industry, but I think the industry as a whole has done an awesome job of creating that career path. My first employer, when I got into the restoration business as an estimator, showed me, he said, look, there's a lot of education and there's a lot of designations that are out there. And in the years since then, the RIA and the IICRC have done a great job of laying out a career path for individuals in this industry. I mean, you can start with a CR designation. If you think of that as the pinnacle of where you want to end up as a restorer, you can back your way all through the prerequisite requirements and the entry-level training. And there's a 3 to 5 year venture there. I've always said this business is not rocket science, but it is science. And if you've got some hands-on aptitude, you're mechanically inclined and you have at least a genuine interest in science, it's a great field for anybody that wants to get into it. So the path is there, it's been laid out. I think where we fall short as restorers is the application of that path and how it relates to recruiting and retention. I think a sore spot for most trades right now is trade promotion. We don't do enough to promote ourselves as a viable career path and sell our businesses. I spent a lot of time in volunteering in trade schools, and the reason I did that was to promote the trade, the business that we're in, but also as a recruiting venue. I got to see firsthand these kids at work, and I could tell you go into a workshop, a lab is what they called it, where they were actually building things, and I could pick out the ones that I wanted to hire. They were the ones leading the crews. They were the ones giving direction. They were the ones measuring twice and cutting once. So there's a lot of untapped opportunity that's out there that I think restorers would do themselves a good service by paying attention to those different avenues.
Yes. Okay, we can't have this conversation without talking about compensation to a certain degree. Every market is different. So we've talked about the Bay Area, and what you make in the Bay Area is going to look different than what you make in rural South Carolina or North Carolina, Michigan, wherever. Every market is different. So we can't put blanket statements on what people make. The state of the industry study, I will say, has some interesting data on wages rising, especially for technicians. So you can see that if you go look at the study. But Tim, I'll toss this one over to you first. How have you seen compensation change over the last decade? And I guess when you look at the companies that you work with, is there an example that you can give of like this company has figured out a good compensation structure that helps not only with hiring, but also helps with retention and really rewards their people?
Yeah, there is a correlation there. We'll talk about sort of the idea of an accelerated wage scale as it relates to the career path thing. But we do an annual compensation survey with our clients, and it's comprehensive enough that it gives us some good benchmarks for ranges of what different positions in a typical company should be paid. So we have a sample size that is reminiscent enough that we can break it down regionally. So we're fortunate in that regard. So to your first comment about wages being different in the Southwest region versus the Northeast region, of course, that's all relative to cost of living, and that's where people want to kind of place their emphasis. Well,
Yep.
The cost of living has increased because due to inflation by X% or whatever. But at the end of the day, I think that really is a product of your pricing model too, and we can talk about that later if you want. But back to your question about what we've seen change, we have seen a significant change just in the last 2 to 3 years with a shift in the number of respondents that had employees that were in the upper end of the ranges. So we saw it move, the bell curve kind of move from the median in the middle to more of the upper end of the spectrum, primarily in the skilled trade positions. Okay. Now, office positions, mid-level management positions have remained relatively consistent, but the skilled positions, we're talking painters, carpenters, cleaners, those who have specific skill sets, they're pushing the upper end of that wage spectrum.
Yep.
The other interesting thing that we've seen out of the survey recently is the number of employers who are offering comprehensive benefits at all levels of the organization. So before, the trend was management positions, maybe administrative positions are eligible for comprehensive benefits. We're now seeing that across the board. I mean, it's close to 80% of the companies that respond offer full benefits with all levels of their organization. And that is a trend that is, we believe, is going to continue. Talking health insurance, you're talking retirement plans, you're talking medical, dental, vision, the whole 9 yards.
That's big. That's a big value. JT, what do you think? What have you seen as far as compensation goes?
Well, I think Tim is spot on. It's especially with the comprehensive compensation models. It's a push to make this a career, not a stepping stone into something else, for 6 months or a year. But the trends I've seen over the last year or two are performance-based compensation. And years ago, I would start talking to owners because their complaint was, I put 3 years into this GM, or I put 3 or 4 or 5 years into this project manager, and they moved on. And the grass was always greener somewhere else. And so we talk about these performance-based compensations. And I'd ask about if they give up 1 or 2 or 3 percentage points to retain somebody and let that individual have a slice of the pie. And they would look at me like I had a third eye, like I was completely off my rocker. They wouldn't even think of it. And now performance-based compensation has really come to the forefront. And there's entire veins of communication out there about UARs, which is unit appreciation rights, SARs, stock appreciation rights, versions of phantom stock, some level of equity for performance. So when you get a good team around you, might be one individual, might be 2 or 3 key individuals. I'm totally in favor of performance-based compensation to retain that talent. If you can get another owner's mindset, which is the hardest thing to get in an employee, right? Somebody thinking like an owner, it's so difficult. If you can get that, and it costs you a couple of percentage points to get somebody rowing the same direction as you, why wouldn't you do that? That's my motto. And it comes with some strings and buttons. It's not just a gift, of course, but I know people who are making $450,000, $500,000 as restoration sales positions. And you might think, well, that's nuts. Why would anybody make that kind of money? Well, what if they're bringing in $12 to $14 million a year and they keep growing? Okay. What about experienced PMs that can double your conversion rates or add 25, 30% to conversion rates from low 50s to high 70s? What does that do to a company when you're doing, six, seven, $8 million a year in sales? So I think there's a time and a place, I think it's becoming more prevalent for performance-based conversation, and I think more and more key employees are going to start demanding that. I think it's going to be a real part of our future conversation when it comes to compensation.
Tim, you have anything else you want to add to that? I know that there are owners out there that love to pay that way and are thrilled when they have these like high level performers, and
Yeah.
they are happy to say this person is going to make X next year or this year if they make this goal or whatever. And those owners, a
Yeah.
lot of owners are proud of how much their people are going to make based on how they're
Yeah.
performing. So Tim, you have anything else you want to add? And I also wanted to ask you, I think you just used the term accelerated rate scale. You don't need to go into depth on it, but I'm curious what that is. And I have to imagine some of the listeners are also curious.
Yeah, I want to make a comment on JT's
Yep.
viewpoint on performance-based compensation, because the two are kind of related, right? So what we're talking about here is top-end performance, and the wage scale that I'm referring to would be more competency-based
Mhm.
and skill-based wages. On the top end of things, everybody likes to talk about big numbers, right? And when I hear about project managers or estimators, making $300,000 or $400,000 a year, your mind can go a couple different ways with that. You can say, as a business owner or store, listen to this, you might go, "Oh my God, I couldn't even fathom that." But maybe as somebody as a career aspires to be, that person in the industry, the possibilities there. I've had clients, I've worked in organizations where that was a reality. But what we're talking about is top end performance here. And we as business owners kind of we get this limited mindset that here's the position that I need in the organizational chart, and these are the performance expectations of this position. And as long as they're in that bucket, they should be making X. And that kind of thinking really limits the possibilities of what could potentially be down the road. So how does a project manager that usually pays between 75 and $100,000 a year for a typical $1 million producer go from that to making $300,000 or $400,000 a year? That requires a different model. That requires a different strategy, a different application. I think as restorers, what you need to do is recognize those opportunities. Back to planning in the previous episode that we did, recognize that there is the potential there to do that, but what do I need to do with my business to put myself in the position to be able to allow somebody the potential of earning that? And the earning is really the focus there. So again, draw the correlation between performance-based and this accelerated wage scale idea. So one of the tools that we use with our clients and we promote is this idea that at the direct labor level, that there should be minimum skills and requirements that are necessary at various benchmarks in your career path, right? So as an entry level restorer, you should be expected to be able to do A, B, and C as a baseline, for your performance. The wage range that is associated with those skills and those competencies is, X to Y, right? But if you want to go from Y to Z, then you need to add D, E, F, and G to your skill set then to move to the next level. You tie that in with the career path we were talking about before with the training and the designations from the RIA and the IICRC. Now you've got a career path that you can lay out and you can say, all right, well, if you want to get from where you're at today to making $22, $23, $24 an hour, whatever that looks like, we need to put you through this class. You need to be able to display that you can do this in the field. You need to be able to perform, X dollars per year in revenue or whatever the case is, right? So you've got a methodical approach to somebody's career advancement and their earning potential within your organization.
In summary, let me just throw out a comment. I think if for the techs that are starting or entry level positions, if you dedicated 4 or 5 years to mastering a craft instead of 4 or 5 years to college, where does that get you?
Mhm.
You know, where you can go in this industry is pretty impressive.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I share a story with my clients all the time when we get into being held hostage by employees when they come in and they say, hey, I'm making $25 an hour, and unless you give me $27 an hour, I'm going to go down the road to the competitor down the street, right? Um, you don't want to be in that position as an employee or as an employer. But that wage scale that we're referring to gives you the ability to have a rational conversation with that individual and say, look, we have the ability for you to make what you want to make. And one specific example always sticks out in my mind. We've been using this system for a lot of years, and I had a painter that was kind of stuck at level 3, right? And he was of the age and tenure that he probably should be making more than what he was making, but he was stuck on this one competency. I was like, man, you can do half of the things that are already in level 4, but if you just learn how to hang wallpaper,
Hmm.
you'd be there. Let's take the next 2 weeks. Let's take the next 3 weeks, and you can learn from this guy over here who's a master at it. You can shadow him, and I can give you the raise. You can earn it. It's not a matter of me giving it to you, it's a matter of you earning it.
Mhm.
And he did. And we were able to
Mhm.
move him up to the next level. So it's a much easier conversation than saying, all right, I'm going to make an exception for you because you're a valuable employee and I don't want you going to my competitor. You
Mhm.
know, a set of hands can always be replaced, but you got to invest in an employee's mind.
Mhm.
Yes, and that avoids, this is a completely different conversation, but raises only happening at annual reviews. If you're doing them, then it
Mhm.
opens up those reviews to be more than, okay, here's your 3% or whatever on the year. That's a whole different, we could go there another time, but okay. Tim, I'll toss it to you before we wrap it up. I'm curious, just final thoughts on making that transition from managing your people to developing your people and what that looks like, because we really are talking about the value that your team brings here to your company, whether it is at the end, like JT's valuing them to sell, or it is today and helping grow the company. How do you transition from managing people to developing them?
Yeah, it's all about, I'm coming back to the ROI on that discussion, Michelle. So looking at the employees as leverage, you have to invest in them. If you were to borrow money from the bank and you spent it needlessly, you're not going to get a return on that. It's going to be viewed on your expense line in your income statement. But if you are able to use that money that you borrowed and invest in it, treat it well, train, and put it in places that are going to realize a return on that investment, now that's when we have that discussion about human capital and having an asset and something that's valuable in your organization. But making that mind shift that you mentioned, it's a conscious effort in understanding what your role in the organization is. If you think of yourself as the one who has to do everything as a business owner, and it's your job to do in the organization, it's not your job to do any longer. You'll eventually get to a point, if you have employees, it doesn't matter how many, but if you have employees, your job now is to be able to train, invest, teach them, educate them to do the work in the field.
Mhm.
That has to be your job. And if you can do that and make that mental mind shift, you'll realize that return on the investment.
Mhm.
Yes. All right. I have one final question that we didn't prep for, and I think that it will hopefully leave the conversation on a high note and end 2024 on a high note before season 2 in 2025. I'm curious if either of you have run into a unique benefit or something interesting that a company does for their team that really seems to resonate with them, whether it's like a benefit or an event that they do or something that they're doing to invest in their people that seems to really resonate. And I will let you two decide who's tackling that first, because I know getting put on the spot for stories can make people's brains freeze. So whoever wants to take that one first.
Well, I'll take it first. I've got one on the tip of my tongue. I valued a company a couple years ago for an owner who really was thinking outside the box, and he's years away from selling, but he wanted some answers. And his employee perks package floored me, absolutely floored me. They have a used car buying program for their employees. They have a new car buying program. They have the ability to help with down payments on a house for their employees. They were thinking completely outside the box. The same company has a boat that is held in the company, and it's an expense. We won't get into that. I'm sure it was the owner's boat that was a personal perk, but the employees could check this boat out on the weekends. So here you've got techs and 15 to 22, $24 an hour people who can get help with a used car, a new car, a home, can check a boat out on the weekends, those sorts of things. And this is a full on ski boat. Okay. I mean, you think about that relative to how most owners view perks in the industry. I loved it. And his tenure is amazing. His culture is amazing. In fact, sometime we should have him on as a guest. Really, really phenomenal guy to speak with. So that's what comes to mind.
Okay.
Yeah, JT, I think that those are all great examples of an interest in the employee. You know, the typical packages, the benefit packages that are out there are pretty standard. Or if they're not standard, they are quickly becoming standard. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Michelle, I can think of hundreds of examples of different things that the employees have done or the employers have done for employees over the years, whether it's meals, whether it's apparel, whether it's,
Yep.
you know, financial assistance with whatever investment it is that they need to make, you know, hair salon on in their
Yep.
office. I mean,
Yep.
you name it, the list goes on and on and on. But I think the underlying theme that you're looking for there is it has to benefit the individuals personally and
Yes.
provide them with something that's going to enhance their life.
Yep.
If it's a meaningless ham at Christmas time, it's probably not getting the job done.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I agree with that. It does need to matter and bring value. So, okay, Tim, JT, thank you so much. This journey has been really fun this year. I have learned a lot as well. Thank you to our listeners who are listening in. We look forward to continuing the conversation in 2025. If you have questions or topics you think you want us to tackle, please feel free to email one of us. You can find all of the emails on CNR's website. So we're easy to find. All of us are. I know we're also on LinkedIn and all the places. You can find us, I promise you. So if you have questions or topics you want us to talk about, please reach out, and we look forward to seeing all of you in 2025.
Thank you all.
Thanks.